back again with our TPO segment. This is part two of our series with Loren Israelson, part two, Electric Boogaloo, if you will. And, this is pretty similar to what we were talking about last week, but Loren gets a little bit deeper into leadership and culture. And I actually challenge him on a few things with regards to, what his core values are and how those get represented in each of the practices. And I think it's really interesting to, get into, how he recreates culture in different practices and how he manages it between multiple practices and manages multiple teams. I think that there's a lot to be said for systematizing these things, but also you have to get into sort of the nuances of, when acquiring a practice, you are certainly buying goodwill and you don't necessarily want to completely wash the slate clean and implement your own, because sometimes you're diminishing that goodwill that you're buying into.
Yeah. And I feel like too, especially when you acquire an existing practice and an existing team, you have to sort of analyze and figure out, what parts of that work for this office and need to persist in this office. Like when you buy that goodwill that exists there, what are you going to keep and what are you going to adopt to this overarching culture and core value that you have? Like, let's say you acquire an office where, they got all these great reviews and they're really, reputable in the community, and they were sort of a team first culture. Maybe they were like, actually, we're always right, and we tend to put our team first, and we'll kind of eschew patients. Like what if they made that work? And and then how do you approach something when like they have a sort of a core value and way they operate it's like totally opposite what you like to do? Like how do you approach that kind of thing?
I mean, ultimately, I wouldn't agree with that core value. So we'd have to have a discussion about it. We'd have to have a discussion about it and figure out, how are we going to make this work? How does it work? Like what happens when a patient comes in with a toothache and you don't want to inconvenience your schedule? Like how does that? So I mean, I'd have the discussion
for sure.
I mean, we have had that discussion. It's like, hey, we're a team that we get out right at 5:00 and we leave at 5:00, and everybody's gone by 5:00. It's like, okay, well, let's talk about that. Let's figure out how that's going to work, or how do we make it work so that we can have patients' priorities be first, but at the same time, respect people's time. So. I mean, that's a great question, Tyler. I don't know the answer to.
Yeah, well, the thing is too, you've got to wonder, like, if they have a team first culture and they've gathered all these fantastic reviews, like, I mean, clearly something's working. You got to wonder maybe if the patient's expectations are just that low, or or what exactly is going on there. But clearly something is working right for them. So you just have to figure out what pieces are working well and that you can keep using, and then what pieces you need to revise and fit to your vision.
Yeah, you can take good from everything. Like there's always good to be had in every practice. There's things that can be learned from every team member. And so maybe Tyler, maybe that example you gave was, I mean, you pulled it out of the air.
Tongue in cheek.
So maybe maybe it's a little tongue in cheek. But I mean, ultimately, like you said, Peyton, there's good things to be had in every practice. Take those, learn from them. Don't go in and destroy a culture. Don't go in and destroy a practice. Make sure you're getting into the right practice. Like if it's if it's your first practice or your second practice, don't go in expecting to change everything. Like it's gonna be a rough little while if you do. Because whatever good is there, right? You're buying goodwill. Most of what you're purchasing is goodwill. If you go in expecting to wreck whatever's there and fire all the team members, get new team members, pretty much you're losing all your goodwill. So do what Peyton's saying. Take everything that you can that's good and make it better, and then find the things that need to be improved and work on those one at a time.
For sure. And I think going back to what you just said there, like if you're buying a practice and wreck is the first word that comes to mind, like it's probably not the one.
Yeah. Keep looking.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I feel like lots of times it can feel like it's like, oh my gosh, like there's no practices. Like, what am I going to do? But if you want to be patient for a little bit, waiting to get the right practice, can really make your life a lot easier in the long term. And I'm sure you've probably kind of seen that with some of the acquisitions that you've had as well.
Yeah, for sure. That's something I think I've repeated multiple times on this podcast is, it's sexy to buy a practice, and it's sexy to buy a practice right out of school or soon after you graduate, but it's 100% not worth it if you get the wrong practice.
Yeah.
Like it would be, you'd be better situated to be an associate for 1, 2, or 3 years if you can't find the right practice. I mean, you'd have to be in a pretty crazy area to take that long to find a really good one. But I mean, you know what I'm saying, right? Like
of course.
If you can't force a bad situation to become really good.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
and I was going to say too, I feel like the thing that I've kind of noticed just with looking at practices, potentially, for me here in the future is I feel like all emotions related to the practice are heightened when you're looking at them. So the things that are good in the practice, you're like, oh my gosh, like this is amazing. But the things that are bad, the red flags, you're like, wow, like is this really going to be what I want? So I think it's just interesting to look at analyzing practices through the lens of yourself versus looking at it for someone else. It really is different.
Explain that a little more, Peyton.
Yeah, so I just feel like when you're going to buy a practice for yourself, you're maybe more hyper aware of the things that could go wrong. Whether maybe it's not in a good location, the patient flow isn't where you'd want it to be, that kind of thing.
Yes, the reason I wanted you to expand on that a little bit more is people tend to just look at the positives, and the positives get magnified by 10 times, and you don't really ever see the negatives. I mean, what red flags would you guys say you should look for when you're looking into buying a practice?
Well, definitely really high staff costs, a low hygiene percentage, perhaps, a practice that just looks maxed out. There's just not necessarily a whole lot of room for growth or necessarily capacity for whatever it is that I'm wanting to do with it. If there's just not enough ops or not a whole lot of hygienists or, yeah, sure. Absolutely. Leaky buckets, a whole lot of money on marketing and not a whole lot of new patients. Shoot. I mean, there's plenty of stuff we could go on with, but those are a few.
So those are a lot of objective numbers, right? Like that's quantifiable things that you can take a spreadsheet, you can do some research, you can figure out all that stuff, right?
Yeah, and that's most of my exposure is spreadsheets.
So what you can quantify is the team.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, of course.
And most of the time, the doc's not going to want you to meet the team.
Yeah.
Until you've made a commitment, you know what's going on, right? So my question to you, Tyler, is how do you figure out red flags with the team?
Without meeting them, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess really, I mean, that's about, going through whoever is selling the practice and just sort of quizzing them about their own culture and how attentive they've been to that and how certain problems get solved in the practice, and just sort of asking them about their team and how well they know them, and sort of the respect they have for them and how they reinforce different things. I guess that would maybe give me some clues, but I'm curious about what you have for that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%. So that all the other red flags that you mentioned, they're all very quantifiable, and most of those things you want to avoid, right? Mm-hmm. And like we were talking about a little earlier, when you're getting into a new practice, you want to be able to gel with the team. You want things to work well. You want to become a leader, a servant leader. Mm-hmm. And what does that look like, right? Because you don't want to come in and fire people. You want,
of course.
Like the first thing most docs say to me when they're looking at selling their practice is, "Hey, I want to make sure my team is taken care of."
Yeah.
And I tell them, yeah, I do too. Like I don't want to fire anybody.
Right.
When we bring on a new team, I would love for every single team member to stick around for 5, 10, 15 years, and be a long-term family member, a long-term team member. So, I mean, it is tricky. A lot of it, I think, comes down to the doctor. Some doctors, they don't think highly of some of their team members, and they say, I don't enjoy working with this person. And it's surprising that they say that sometimes they say that.
Yeah.
But a lot of times they say, I've been with this person for 10 years. I've been with this person for 15 years. I've been with this person for, X number of years. And everybody works so well together. And in those instances, there's a good chance that you're stumbling into something great. And even if sometimes if the team is really good, I think that can outweigh some of the red flags. You were saying something about if the staff costs are too high. If staff costs are too high, that is a red flag. But what's the production, the practice, and is it the staff? Is it the patient load, or
Right.
is it just the doc is referring out a bunch of stuff?
Yeah.
And slowing down significantly. So could you come in and within 90 to 180 days, could you be back at a healthy staff level?
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm not saying that you should do that, but that's just something to think about and consider, that the team is super important, and it can either take a long time to build a great team if you don't have a great team to go in with, or if you just take a long time to learn how to be a leader. Like you'll make mistakes. You'll hire bad. You'll fire bad. Like you'll make mistakes, and it could take you a long time to figure it out, or you didn't get into a great situation, or you could go into a great situation from the get go, and shave a couple of years off of your experience, and also getting the practice to where you want it to be.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant, because this is actually kind of a humbling topic, because we focus so much on the quantifiables, right? Like people send us financials or spreadsheets or what have you, and we sort of just go through numbers. And you're talking about something that is just so important, but we don't necessarily have formulas for it. And it's funny because an interview we had fairly recently, Peyton and I, we interviewed one of our guests. His name is TPO, as far as the show is concerned, and he bought a wonderful looking practice on paper. I mean, we were just going gaga over it. And after all has been said and done, like it is still a great practice. But he bought it and had absolutely no idea what he was walking into. So he went in there. There were two docs in the practice as he walked in. And what he came to find, and he had no clue about it until after he bought the practice, was that there were two docs with two entirely separate teams that were not permitted to communicate with each other. They passed passive aggressive post-it notes between the two of them whenever it was necessary. But this had been going on for like a while. And like the teams literally had not spoken to each other. It was like North and South Korea. There was just like a wall in between them, basically. And like he walked into that and was like, oh, well, him and his wife actually, Miss Tapatio. And they walked into that and just, they were not prepared for it, right? They had all these different, low-hanging fruits that we had, sort of helped identify in our interview, or the first interview, and there's some due diligence and stuff like that. And then you walk in, you're like, oh, well, I have a slightly different set of problems. I have basically two teams that are almost meeting for the first time. And, I think that is such a crucial element in analyzing an opportunity, is knowing what kind of team you're walking into. And especially for someone in your position and in your partner's position, when you guys buy practices that you're not necessarily going to be working in, you're not going to be, on the battlefield with all the time. You're just going to be having meetings with office managers and dentists, what have you, but you're not in the practice every single day. So culture is something that is extremely important, because you're not really there to control it day in and day out. So, I mean, that's a fantastic point that you bring up.
Yeah, that's super important to me. I mean, if I talk to a doc and it's pretty apparent that they don't have a great culture in their practice, and they don't have team members that are pushing together, I'm not super interested in buying the practice. Like
Wow.
I'll pass on it.
Wow.
Because there's a lot of other practices that do have that good culture.
Yeah.
So anyhow, yeah, I think that's super important, dude. I don't know how you'd find that out though about that practice with the two doctors. That would be
Yeah.
rough. That'd be rough to because now you gotta. I mean, there has to be massive amounts of tension in that practice.
Yeah. Yeah. And we talked about it in that second part. And it looks like for the most part they've actually resolved it. And it turned out the teams wanted to work together again. Like it wasn't like they were resentful of each other. It was more of an inter-doctor thing. And those doctors ended up going. So it worked out for the better, but still, I mean, they walked into a minefield. And just had absolutely no clue. So, I mean, it's just a great point. So I do want to circle back since you brought culture back. What are, I think you said there were 4 core values. It was patient first and love your people. I heard at least those 2. What were the other 2? And why did you choose them specifically?
Yeah, and let me can I back out and finish a thought that I was just thinking about
Oh, please do.
finding
Yeah.
out the culture of the team.
I don't want you to lose it. Yeah.
So I think one other thing you can do is ask the doctor you're purchasing from who's the leader in your practice.
Oh.
And sometimes they'll say, it's me. Sometimes they'll say it's the office manager. Sometimes they'll say it's a hygienist or an assistant. And just dive into that a little bit more and say, why? Like what, how does that pan out, and like why would they be considered the leader, and just ask them who's the leader. And one, you can find out, is the doctor a little bit more of a very passive type of doctor, and they just kind of hand over the reins to the team and let the team run with it. You can also find out if is the office manager a leader. Do people love the office manager? Anyway, so that's just a thought in terms of when you're doing due diligence and you're talking to the doc. Ask the doc about each team member and say, what do you like about this team member? What are some things that what's this team member's strengths, and what are some things you wish they could improve on? Who's the leader of the practice, and just try to get to know the team members a little bit, and then when you show up and you're the new person, maybe you know a little bit more about these people, like you feel like you can connect with them a little bit. Like you can try to connect with Susie, or you can connect with Andrew, or whoever's in the practice. Like how do you get that personal connection with them, and start to build something that is going to help you with your culture.
So does who the leader is in that practice, does that have an impact on your perception of the practice itself? Or are you kind of amenable to perhaps the hygienist that's a leader of the practice, or the assistant that's leader of the practice? Does that particularly matter, or is it just sort of how they lead and how that organizational structure plays in? Is that what's important?
It's more of, it's usually the office manager that's leader, or the doctor. And,
okay.
So, yeah, I mean, that's usually who it ends up being.
Okay.
More often the office manager than the doctor.
Okay.
And then in certain instances where it's an assistant, you just got to get to know them real well. And,
okay. So it's sort of a lead in to a larger conversation.
Yeah. So our core values are patients first, which of course is self-explanatory. Like, we're here for the patient. Patient pays our paycheck. Like, we are making sure that we're taking care of the patient first and foremost. Whether that's diagnosing correctly, making sure that we're giving them the best options clinically and financially, trying to help them smile, helping them have a good experience. So, I mean, that was pretty self-explanatory. Love your people. Kind of a sub topic on that is, assume the best. I think a lot of times teams and just people in general, if something happens you don't like, are we automatically assuming that person means best for us, right? Or are we jumping to conclusions? Love your people and let's help each other succeed. Let's have a great team, great environment.
Right.
The next one is being resourceful and resilient. Being problem solvers. How do we take the resources we have and figure out an answer to a problem? There's always going to be change. We implement different and new softwares at different times, and is that something we can be resilient with? We can learn. We try to optimize our processes. So it's not going to be something that's the same every day and day in, day out for the next 20 years. We're going to try to get better and improve. So how do you be resourceful and resilient with that?
I like that one.
And then the last one is continual improvement, which is kind of a lead off of the being resourceful and resilient. But I guess resourceful is more problem solving, and continual improvement is more, hey, let's shoot for personal and professional growth, and be striving to become the best person and clinician that we can be.
I love all those. I have one that I want to challenge you on, but I think that I think the one that really piques my interest is the resiliency. So especially how you contextualize that and say that this has to do with changes and new things that get implemented in the practice. I think that in terms of setting expectations, that is a really, really brilliant one to have, especially for practice that is growth minded. One where you're going to be implementing new systems and new softwares and trying to tinker and find new things that'll help, with growing and changing and making things more efficient. Like there's a lot of practices that will be run virtually the same way for 10, 15, 20 years. And maybe a practice that you have acquired is like that. And then when you sort of introduce this idea of resourcefulness and resiliency, it's like people are preparing themselves for those changes, and whenever those things come along, these problems come along, they're not necessarily surrendering to them or complaining about them. They're challenging themselves to be resourceful individually and sort of like find their own solutions to these things. And obviously, I'm sure there's like a feedback system for that, and you kind of learn about those problems as you go. But I think by setting that expectation for people to almost, be prepared and challenge themselves for the unknown and whatever may be coming along, and priming them for that kind of change, I think that's really, really smart. And that's one of the first times I've heard anyone actually include that in a core value in a culture. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, it's I don't know. It's been super important. Which I'd love to hear your feedback on
challenge.
Which one would you want to challenge?
So I'm not saying it's wrong at all, but where I see it being hard is really what I mean. Is like where I see this coming up a lot is in terms of patients first. So I'm sure you want team members to feel valued and respected, and if you're building a culture and a family, like you say, if you always try to put the patient first and the patient's always right, even when they might really be acting a little, because we've all encountered difficult patients who are just difficult for God knows what reason, right? Like, let's be honest about it, right? So at what point, I feel like that's something you can really butt up against, is like, we're trying to put the patient first here, but in this situation, the team member's doing all they can, and they're still kind of on the butt end of this. And maybe you need to stick up for your patient and, for your team member, and like show them that you value them. Is that something that's come up for you before? You don't have to be terribly specific. I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's, I get what you're saying in terms of patient first. I think, there's got to be some context behind that, and I think more than anything, common sense.
Okay.
Sure. And I'm not pushing back on you at all. I completely agree. Yeah. So yeah, customer's not always first, right? Actually, I would maybe say it this way. The customer's not always right. But patient should come first. Okay. The patient's needs should come first, but that doesn't mean they're right. That doesn't mean the patient might not be a jerk, right? The other day, I had a patient I had a patient yell at one of my team members, and I told him to leave.
Right.
Just not a great situation, and patient was having some concerns, and I told him that wasn't acceptable, and anyways, so it's not a patient. The patient is right. It's
okay.
the patient is first.
I see.
I love that wording.
If the patient isn't a good fit in your practice, well, in order to put that patient first, they probably find a better situation elsewhere. Right?
That is an excellent clarification. It is. Yeah. I think that's an important distinction to make. Yeah.
And going along with that, you try to, any process you build, and I think core values kind of encompass as well. You kind of build for the majority, and you got to have common sense around the minority of situations, right? Like you can't build a process for like so like for instance, the weird patient situation I had recently, like that's happened once in 3 years, where it's
build a
been
system around that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not gonna build a core value or a process and a system around that, right?
Yeah.
And the same with any crazy system, any crazy process that happens. Like your operations manual can get to be 1,000 pages long if you build out a process for every time something goes wrong, right?
Right.
So I mean that's just bureaucracy in terms of
that makes sense.
Right. So build team members to be resourceful and resilient, so that they can figure out the answers to those problems.
Right.
When you do have things go wrong, right? When a patient is claiming they don't owe any money, but I mean everybody knows that they owe $400, and there's like no working around this problem. How does the team put the patient first in terms of treating them well?
Right.
But then also figuring out the problem. Is it a problem with the accounting and with the practice management software and the insurance company? And can they be resourceful and resilient and go and solve the problem, rather than pushing that up the chain and saying, "Hey, I can't figure this out. Should we just write this balance off for the patient?" Right. So. But I do appreciate the challenge, and I agree with you. I agree with you that it can't be the patient's always right, and the team isn't valued in that situation, because that could lead to a toxic culture.
Yeah, I think you addressed that very well. I always try to find like the little wrinkles and things, and like the little exceptions and things. But I think you make a great point of, you don't build systems around that. You build systems around what's happening 99% of the time. And then you build a culture that fills in those little gaps for whenever those things happen, right? Like whenever that sort of thing comes up, you trust in your team to be resourceful, resilient, to assume the best in that patient and do everything they can to resolve the problem, and ultimately find some sort of creative solution whenever that comes along, instead of kicking at the chain. So I think that's a really good point for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And the thing too is, like you were saying, your second core value is, love your people. And, lots of times your people is your team. So, I feel like to an extent that kind of covers what Tyler was saying as well.
Absolutely. For sure. Yeah. Well, Loren, this has been a really wonderful interview. And, to be honest, I didn't know exactly how we were going to go about it. And it seems like we really spent most of our time talking about leadership and culture. And I think that's pretty appropriate, given the context of what you're doing. I mean, you are the quintessential, group practice, young dentist person that's owning all these different practices, out of school. And I think a lot of people are really curious about, growth strategy and how you acquire practices and what your trajectory is and how you plan all that out. And I'm sure you could write a book on it. But I think that what seems so consistent, and to me, whenever we have a conversation, is how you're always doubling down on those unquantifiable things, how it's your leadership and it's your culture, and, how you structure meetings and how you're touching base with the team and how you're keeping things consistent. It seems to me like there's some writing on the wall there, in that you're not just spouting off, all the quantifiables all the time. Like you're talking about a lot of these, really deep, personal leadership level things that probably come up mostly, in your role within your partnership. And I think that's just super important. I really appreciate you being so vulnerable about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's a fun journey, and I really enjoy sharing it. I've got I've got a bunch of dental students that send me Marco Polos, and we just chat through stuff as they're thinking through
Awesome.
questions about business and life after dental school, and life during dental school, and what do I see in these areas, and I love it. So I'm glad to be on, and glad to chat with you guys. I think it's cool what you guys do, and the business that you guys are pushing forward and helping advance private practice, and helping advance dental students advancing their careers. I think that's really awesome.
For sure. So in the spirit of, Marco Polos that you're sending out here to dental students, is there any, parting words that you'd have for them, any lessons you want to leave them with that we may not have already said?
Well, I said the one about it's sexy to own a dental practice, but it's you can get yourself in a bad situation, so it's sexier to buy the right dental practice. There's that one.
That was a sexy line.
I don't know. I don't have anything off the tip of my tongue, but I am happy to chat with anybody. If you have questions about life after dental school, if you have questions about valuing a practice, or team or culture, or whatever it may be.
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to commend you on as busy as you are. I can tell that you really genuinely like to spread information and help people out, and spread your infinite wisdom. So I really do appreciate that. So if anyone wants to reach out to you, if anyone has particular questions, maybe they can't find you on Marco Polo, could they shoot you an email? Could they find you on Facebook Messenger or anything like that? Is that something you'd be comfortable with, or?
Yeah, Facebook is great.
Okay.
Emails, I probably won't see it for a long time. Email is probably not a great way. Texting Marco Polo or Facebook Messenger is probably the quickest way to get a response.
All right. Well, you heard it here, folks.
yeah. I'll just give you my phone number. It's 405-256-8614. So
what a guy.
shoot me a text, or Marco Polo, or Facebook Messenger.
Amazing. That is definitely a share practices first. And if you ever want to have that removed, just let me know. But because I have a feeling you're going to get blown up.
No, I'm good. I really enjoy it. So
awesome.
Anyways.
Awesome. Well, Loren, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you being on. And, thank you for all the pearls. I've got plenty of notes, and I'm sure Peyton does too. He's just as good or better of a note taker than I am. So, Loren, thank you so much. Until next time. We really appreciate it again, and we'll probably talk to you soon.
Yeah, good to chat with you both.
All right, man. All right, so that wraps up our second interview series with Loren Israelson. This has been just a really awesome revisit to Loren's life and career. I really appreciate him taking his time and being just so generous with his experiences in cautionary tales, and just being super vulnerable about the challenges that he's had in doing what he's done. And man, what he's accomplished in such a short period of time in his very young career is so impressive. And I think he serves as sort of a gold standard for what young dentists out there can do if they're really intent on multiple practice ownership. And he embodies so many of the things that we talk about with leadership, culture, growth strategy, mindset, all of the above. So really love Loren for coming on and being so gracious to offer his time and energy. And man, I'm pretty certain that's the first time anyone's ever put their own phone number in the episode. So in the future, if that gets pulled and you don't know what I'm talking about, just understand that at one point, Loren Israelson was generous enough to offer up his phone number on the show. Man, that was unprecedented. But anyway, if anyone has any questions, you can certainly reach out to him directly. But if there's any questions about the interview, you can certainly reach out to us and we can have a talk about it.